We cover software and cloud news. We start, as usual, with some security. And yeah, we just cover what's happened in the news over the last week. Today, we have what's being called the MOAB, which is not the mother of all bombs, but the mother of all releases of information. So we have that going on. You definitely want to check it out. We're going to cover what you should do in these cases. And then we also have a few other minor security things coming up. If you're a LastPass user, you're going to want to stick around because LastPass has some changes that are going into effect that could lock you out of your account if you're not up on them. And if you're a Java engineer, yeah, you should also stick around. There's some security flaws that are found in enterprise Java applications that you should be aware of. After that, we have some stuff to talk about with Apple. Apple has lost some lawsuits in Europe, so there's a lot of stuff changing in Europe, specifically if you have an iPhone. This does affect developers tangentially, so that's why I'm covering it. It's also kind of interesting. Yeah, so that's coming up. We have some random stuff about tech acquisitions, as well as NASA's doing something kind of interesting. And then we'll jump into the cloud news. So without further ado, let's talk about maybe the biggest news. I thought about making a stream of this on Thursday. If you guys would like me, if anything big like this happens, to stream on the day that it happens, let me know. Let me know. So the headline was Mother of All Breaches. That's how they came up with MOAB. And it looks something like this. Mother of all breaches reveals 26 billion records. So there was a large breach. Now, I don't believe all of these were new breaches. I believe this was a collection of a lot of breaches, but there is still less information known. A large amount of the data was from Tencent. Sorry, I always want to say it's something else, but it's Tencent. At least that's what I think it is. The largest records were, but there's everything from LinkedIn, which I know a lot of people are on LinkedIn. MySpace, I'm not sure anybody is old enough here to know what MySpace is. But they're definitely an Adobe were ones that I saw on this list as maybe Canva. Anyways, now what should you do? Well, one, this is why you should be using a password manager, because you should have unique passwords for every single one of these. The other thing that you can do is go to Have I Been Pwned and look up your email addresses, your phone numbers, and whatnot, and see what has been released for you. Go check this out. I Have Been Pwned has one, as well as Cyber News has one as well. So you can go here and check on either one of these sites what has been leaked. Now, I would recommend moving forward, if you haven't at this point, you need to make sure you have a password manager. You have to have a unique, hard to guess password for every site. If you're sharing, so the big problem here is if you've made a unique, hard to guess password and then it was leaked on any one of these sites, the problem is people can go and try your email, which usually stays the same across sites, and try it on a whole bunch of other sites. Also, two-factor authentication. You should use two-factor authentication. 100%. That's I personally love the YubiKeys. But there's apps for two-factor authentication on your phone. The reason I don't like the two-factor authentication on the phone as much as a YubiKey is that phone is very personally tied to me. If I accidentally left this YubiKey in an airport, nobody would know what account it's tied to. It has nothing to personally identify me. That is one thing that I like about the YubiKey versus the phone, but the phone is fantastic as well. So two-factor authentication, and go and make sure you have a unique password. It's a must-have. But anyway, so yes, the largest breach of records known so far was released. Yeah, the phone. I also hate the phone because if your two-factor authentication is on the phone and you also log into your bank and stuff from the phone, if somebody gets your phone and is able to unlock it for whatever reason, it's just a single point of failure. So I do like the YubiKeys. I do like the YubiKeys. They're not terribly expensive. I know. The phone is better than nothing. The phone, if all you can do is the phone and you have a phone, go for that. I think they're like $30 though for the YubiKeys. Okay. So that was kind of big news. I can tell you that I had stuff leaked. Actually, the thing that I had leaked was old, so that was great for me. All right, but talking about passwords managers, it's time to change your LastPass password. So they have a new rule for their passwords. It has to be at least, your main password has to be at least 12 characters long for LastPass. And if you don't update it before the time, you can get locked out. LastPass is beginning its enforcement in... English. LastPass is beginning to enforce its requirement for minimum password length across all accounts. And those that don't update their credentials could get locked out. So basically, if you ignore it for too long, once you've received the message, you have 72 hours to create a new master password. So I'm letting you know, anyways, you've been warned since January 3rd that this was coming up. So make sure if you're leveraging LastPass, that I just go ahead and change it now. You don't want to get locked out of that. That's a lot of work to recover. And the last thing in security is there's a major security flaws in Java applications. A European researcher has warned. So if you're a Java engineer out there and doing it, Java is everywhere. It's one of the largest languages out there. You can find it in everything from, the JVM powers everything on Android. I think a lot of people are moving to Kotlin on the Java, but a lot of the native things are Java, and it's the Java stack as well. So a lot of those libraries that have been around for a while are Java. So even if you're using Kotlin, you're probably using Java. And again, it's still the JVM. Java runs on 1 billion machines still from early 2000. I mean, it still runs everywhere. It would not surprise me if Java was the most programmed language next to Python. If I had to guess, it would be, JavaScript too. I mean, I'm going to talk about enterprise backends. It would not surprise me if Java was the number one. Or two. Python would be the other one. If we're talking about just code-wise, top three. It's easily top three. We're still just in a little bit of an ad. I don't know. My settings got changed somehow. It was supposed to be able to stream for an hour without that ad roll, and it's now been updated where it's like 10 minutes. I have to go see if there's a setting I can change to make this not happen, because it's a pain. For everyone. But I always end up escaping from JVM. I do too. I don't do that much in JVMs anymore. But anyways, I brought it up. I'm gonna post this. There's their papers here as well. I didn't dig into them because they don't particularly affect me. But if you're doing Java, this might be something that you're very interested in following up with. It has something to do with the serialization and deserialization in Java and those objects. It seems to be specifically Java deserialization and serialization, but I don't know too much. And that was all for security. So we have the really big data dump. Again, a lot of those things seemed like they were from... Some of them were old. I know the LinkedIn one. Now, maybe there's newer LinkedIn information in there too. And a lot of the information from it so far, people are still going through the data that was dumped. There was a lot of data that was dumped. So I don't know that we know the full extent of it. But it's not too early or too late to start being a little more secure online. It means two-factor authentication. It means a YubiKey. It means a password manager. And it's 2024. If you don't have those things, it's time to get them. Your company does Kotlin. Kotlin would be an interesting question. I haven't dug into Kotlin because Kotlin's JVM, right? And I don't know if this is a JVM issue or a actual Java language spec issue. So again, I couldn't tell you. And the other thing that you have to think about with Kotlin is what libraries are you using? Are they JVM? Are they Java? You might be running more Java in your Kotlin than you think you might be. I don't know. They mix and match, right? You can use Java libraries in Kotlin, right? Yeah, I think you can. I'm like 90%. I used OK HTTP in Kotlin with an Android thing, and that was a Java thing. So yeah. I don't know enough. I would look into it. I like Kotlin, by the way. If you watched my AI review or my language review last week or yesterday, I like Kotlin. I think it's a fairly good take. And the PHP side. Okay, well, PHP did not fare well on my list for backend development, so we won't talk about that. Don't go watch yesterday's stream. All right, let's talk about Apple for a little bit. There's actually a lot of news around Apple. Some of it affects developers. We'll talk about all of it because a lot of developers are out there developing for Apple, and this directly affects how Apple develops for developers. I'm sure that you've heard some of it. So like one thing that people will point out and talk about is Apple is going to now charge 50 cents per download per year for free apps from their app store. But the effects are larger reaching. The effects are much larger reaching than that. So you'll see news like this. Apple finally letting people run third-party browsers unfettered. So this one is kind of a big one that affects Mozilla. So everybody that had a third-party browser on the iPhone had to use specifically, they specifically had to basically use WebKit, the engine that Safari used, which isn't real great. They had to use WebKit as their renderer effectively. So everybody's browser was the exact same on iPhone. Now, the thing is, they did this only for Europe. So Mozilla is actually really upset because they're like, this would just add complexity to our build to build a separate Firefox for EU people. And so I'm not even sure that Firefox is going to even update and change. They seemed kind of very salty about it because of how it's being released. And that goes for all the other things because this came along with some legal battles and whatnot. But another thing that comes from this is Android or iPhone will allow third-party app stores. So that's also coming. Now, I don't know why they've made such a stink about it because Android's always had third-party app stores. And guess what? Nobody uses the third-party app stores. I mean, you do. There are people that uses the third-party, but everybody uses the Google Play App Store. And they use a separate one if they need side-loaded apps for some reason. But yeah, the thing that I want to talk about is this is only for Europe. So iOS said, fine, if you're forcing us to do it, we'll do it. But it's only for Europe. And I don't even understand exactly how they're going to do it. So like if I take an iPhone, I don't have an iPhone, but if I took an iPhone and flew into Europe, would all of a sudden I be able to do these things? Or is it only if I like register with my address in Europe? I don't know. I don't know the full extent of all of these things, but these are all things that are happening. Now, this has some really cool things that Xbox and Nvidia could do with their streaming services on the iPhone. Again, though, this is only coming to Europe. Only coming to Europe because of this. So, what are your guys' thoughts? So, you're saying that if I buy an EU iPhone, that I'll be able to do it? I mean, they don't work as well over here because they don't hit all the same towers, but they do have overlap. Okay. I mean, that's dumb. That's stupid. I do hate it. I think that's people are talking about the 50-cent fee for the free apps and whatnot, and I think that's petty. I think it's petty on Apple's part. But they're not talking about this part as much, not that I saw. And I think this is what's going to affect developers because, as Mozilla put it, and this is why I was covering it here because this is kind of developer news, it means you have to have two different forms of your app effectively. And, you've always had to deal with the data in the back end a little bit differently, but the front end application could be the same. But it could be in the future that you actually have to have a of the front end of the mobile part, two separate ones. I do see it. Apple saw that Unity had planned and went, yeah, that's neat. What did Unity have planned? What did Unity have planned? I can look it up. Oh, that's right. Unity one. That's. Oh, yes, the debacle with Unity per install fees. The weird thing is, it's only for free apps. It's only for free apps. You don't get charged it if you have a paid app. I mean, obviously they take their cut, but it's for the free apps. Yeah, that's absolutely right. I'm hoping that if what comes out of this is that like things like this, like the Xbox and Nvidia streaming to the iPhones, actually opens up the doors to get it pushed through to the rest of the world. I hope that there's not this stupid division, but we'll see. I thought that this wasn't covered enough and could affect developers. I mean, it is affecting Mozilla specifically. Did anybody else see anything else about this? I didn't even tie the Unity. That's a really good point, Stiggy Man. I didn't tie the Unity. We covered the Unity news. It was stupid that they did it. I think Apple is being a little bit petty with being forced to do it. There might have been a little bit more mature way of dealing with it, but yeah. The thing is, Android has charged just as much. So the Android marketplace has charged just as much for their credit processing as the iPhone store has. And you have always been able to have a third-party market. So I think it's been pretty petty. Maybe it's the age of 99-cent ringtones. Dude, wasn't that dumb? Do we want to go back to? We need to tell Apple we don't want to go back to that. That's not what we're wanting. We don't want the 99-cent ringtones that you have. Yeah. It's kind of like how Netflix and all the streaming services have become the new set box cable things. Like, obviously, you don't have to get cable run. You can start and stop it, which is nicer. But it's almost like, okay, now you get Amazon Prime, and then you add on your $15 channels for each one that you want, and some have ads, and yeah. Yeah, Sticky Man, you're walking a fine line with Automod. People get auto-modded for a whole lot less. Meant to be. Yeah. All right, let's move on to some more happy news. We'll I don't know that there's a whole lot more to add. I watched some other people's commentary on it. I just wanted devs to understand like it could be more work on them going forward. If we're talking about what goes on forward, I don't know. Will Apple actually eventually charge 50 cents per user per year? I don't know. I can't tell you. You know, part of me hopes that that's not how it rolls out and they end up rolling out to the rest of the world. Will it happen? I don't know. VS Code has multi-window now? So that's happy news. VS Code has multi-window. Can you drop a link? I don't know what that means. I've always had multiple windows. Drop a link. If you have news that I miss that concerns developers, bring it up. That would be something. I've been not using VS Code as of late, but Monta, I hate iOS as well. I hate iOS as well. I've hated how, I hate the Mac UI. I know a lot of people love the Mac UI and they feel like it just works. It's the worst UI management of all of them, from iOS to Mac. Don't get me on this rant because it is a rant, but iOS has the worst, absolute worst UI experience of any device, iOS and Mac. You want your window to just go full screen or half screen? Well, you can buy a third-party application to do that. At least that was 2 years ago. Because Apple can't manage Windows at all. What does an OS do? It manages a file system and the Windows. And then the file system, it leaves crap all over file systems. So if you have a shared file system with like Linux and Windows, it leaves their DS crap all over them. And that's horrifying. Absolutely. I can't stand Apple devices. All right, we have a bit of breaking news, something I missed. Thank you for bringing this up. Multi-window VS Code. Let's talk about it. Maybe later. The most upvoted feature request in Visual Studio Code is coming. Oh, okay. I see. I was wondering what it was. I was like, I've always been able to like do this. And I work in i3, but I get this, especially if you're a multi-monitor person, you'd like it on like one with the code on the skinny monitor, and then like on your main monitor you have the nice wide view. I get this. This is pretty nice. Cool. So this is coming to Visual Studio Code. I know a lot of people use Visual Studio Code. It's a fantastic product. I haven't been using it lately just because I've been teaching myself Vim very slowly and very painfully. So I haven't been using it, but that's not because it's not fantastic. It's fantastic just because I've been forcing myself to learn Vim. Cool. You like your iPhone because you can't tamper with it? I get you. I think that we all have that same tendencies. It's like why some people love Vim. They like to tamper with it. I'm doing it for a learning experience, but it is tempting to just keep tinkering with things. So sometimes not having that ability is a nice thing. I did learn how to exit Vim. It was painful. It took me crying for like 3 hours and trying random things, but I figured it out. NASA flies drones autonomously for air taxi research. This is interesting. I actually have been working on autonomously flying a drone. I built a drone, 3D printed the stuff, and I have some cameras on it. It's not in a place where I can really stream doing stuff with it because it would be a lame stream. It's hard to test, but and it doesn't avoid things right now. It runs into things, but it can take off and land by itself. That's a first step, which it wasn't really AI stuff. So, anyways, but this is kind of cool. I thought it was interesting enough to share. Then we have 2 acquisitions. HPE is acquiring Juniper Networks, as well as Synopsys is acquiring Ansys, which I didn't know this one, which it was a huge tech deal. $35 billion is not small. 71 billion was the VMware. Oh man, and VMware is tanking. Let's not talk about that. Anyway, so these were 2 pretty big. Juniper Networks is a pretty big one, and so HPE is looking to acquire that. And this one, this was a little weird because I was wondering what they were doing, but this is basically, it says graphics software, but it's actually a graphic engineering product, not graphics. So it makes more sense for why Synopsys would be acquiring it. Do you guys see anything else in random news? Thank you so much for bringing up the VS Code. That's awesome. Please bring those types of things. I don't see everything. I can only search for so much. Let's jump into the cloud news. Let's talk about Amazon first. Amazon ECS supports a native integration with Amazon EBS volumes for data-intensive workloads. Now, if you don't know what these abbreviations are, this is the Elastic Container Service, and this is the block storage, Elastic Block Storage. Amazon puts, instead of Amazon Block Storage, they put Elastic. That's their thing. So this is really cool if you were wanting to use ECS with EBS. It's pretty cool. It would make it a lot more simple. For things like Fargate. So when you're working on Fargate, this can be a little bit of a pain. So I haven't used it, but it should be easier if you were trying to leverage Fargate with some data-intensive workloads, like if you were trying to do image processing on EBS volumes. If you wanted to have like a task that spun up on Fargate and actually like turn through a bucket of data, that this could be really, really useful. Yeah, AWS is its own beast. SageMaker Automatic Model Tuning now supports Delete API. So you can now delete stuff. I think this is a big deal. I didn't know that it didn't have a Delete API. That was terrifying. You could only create. Obviously, I believe that you could delete in the UI, but if you're using the API. Amazon IVS announces audio. So IVS is their streaming service. So this is actually what Twitch used at first, was Twitch's streaming service. So they announced an audio only pricing for low latency streaming. I think this is actually a really big deal because if you wanted to stream audio and just audio, it used to be just as expensive as HD video. Basically, you had to stream the HD video. Even though you weren't sending video. And so now for a tenth of the price, you can stream just audio for your podcast or whatever you're wanting to do with audio only. So the audio only. So I think if you were trying to do this, this is actually a really big deal. It's probably only affecting a small group of people, but it's a big deal. Amazon Q in QuickSight is now available for preview in Europe, Frankfurt region. Now, I have tried Q extensively. I have shared my examples. If you watched last week's AI ranking, Q was dumpster tier. Absolute dumpster tier. Q is a hot piece of garbage. I wouldn't use it yet. I would wait. If you think I'm being too strong in my opinion of Q, let me tell you, I have used a lot of AIs on this channel as we have tried to judge how good they are at just about anything. And Q was the worst one at everything. The only thing it ever answered was how to spin up an EC2 instance in AWS. Everything else, how to print a line in Python, it couldn't do. How to do anything, it couldn't do, except stand up that EC2 instance. That was it for AWS. Okay, Monta, one quick note here. EKS is different than ECS and Fargate. I know that AWS is a bit confusing, but EKS is their Elastic Kubernetes service, and ECS is their container service, and Fargate is kind of their other container services. Well, Fargate lets you schedule and run ECS. Okay. Cool. All right. So let's jump into GCP news. GCP actually had it's a weird way of saying it. GCP actually had some interesting things come down the pipeline. So they can now have custom targets for Cloud Deploy, allowing you to write your own deployment thing. So effectively, from now on, if you want to leverage Cloud Deploy, but you want to hit a custom endpoint, a custom target, a custom thing, you can do that. You can create a custom target. I think that this is actually pretty fantastic. Now, it is in preview. I wouldn't be depending on this in production just yet, but these things do tend to go to production. For the most part, I haven't really seen something that goes preview and then just gets scrapped altogether. Not saying it hasn't happened, just doesn't happen often. So I think that this is pretty cool. Add a sidecar to a Cloud Run service. So now in Cloud Run, the managed service for Prometheus sidecar for Cloud Run can just basically be deployed with Cloud Run, making it easier to monitor your stuff. So this was a new thing that was put out. Pretty cool. I haven't used it. I don't love GCP as a cloud, or GCP. I'm going to have to say it that way from now on. Anyways, I don't love it as a cloud, but if you are using it, that's pretty awesome. And the last thing for GCP is allow deploy AlloyDB Omni on Kubernetes. So this is if you've leveraged AlloyDB, there is a new operator for Kubernetes. So if you're running in Kubernetes, you you can now leverage this AlloyDB Omni in your Kubernetes cluster if you would so like. Sticky Man, I missed it, but you're right. It could be neat for a cheap home setup for like a digital radio station. I agree with that. The problem with GCP isn't just in their UI. I don't hate their UI, and their command line is better than AWS's. Their command line is actually usable, and AWS's is very difficult to leverage properly. It's okay in scripts because you can figure it out, but it's too complicated. Whereas GCP's, I can reasonably figure out how to do something. And I don't know GCP nearly as well as I know AWS. Their UI isn't the best, but it's also not 2015 AWS that changed once a year and got worse each year. That there was several years of terrible, horrible UIs there. They have a couple of problems, though. First, they don't do the platform engineering very well. Their internal teams don't use their internal teams tooling, which makes getting support through them much more painful because they have to cross through different teams, and it's just not fantastic. The other problem that I see GCP being or having is they don't have nearly the same amount of trust that the other clouds do. So they've actually increased pricing, which neither of the other major clouds have ever actually done that. So usually they try to find efficiencies and decrease pricing, whereas GCP has at least twice specifically increased pricing. The other thing is they kind of do things the Google way, and I think that hurts them because they think that everybody runs like Google. And so The one exception to this is Firebase, which I know they bought Firebase and it's now part of GCP. But outside of Firebase, which is kind of not like an enterprise thing, they kind of expect people to do things the Google way. And I think all of those things kind of hurt them. They don't feel like a fully fleshed out cloud like Azure and AWS. So if you're using cloud services, classic, the deployment model, it's retiring on August 2024. So you have some time. You have about a year and a few months. If you're using that, you got to make plans on not using that in the future. So that's going to be going away. The other thing that you have is you have public preview of Circuit Breaker in the Azure API management. So Circuit Breaker is something that's really cool. You have a way to basically stop somebody if there's too many requests being made. It's one of those things that you could care less about until you need it, and then you definitely need it. Circuit breakers are another way to also deal with metastable errors. So when you have an error that I need to do a video on metastable errors, but there are errors that once they happen, let's say you had a peak in usage and demand. And what happens is when that peak happens, it breaks something. So even decreasing the usage back down to normal levels doesn't fix the error. It's metastable. It's stable at the error is stable at your stable run rate. And because of that, you'll need circuit breakers and things like that to alleviate. Like I said, you don't really need them until you need them. And then if you need them, it's too late. So circuit breakers are cool. Public preview in the Azure API. Now, I'm actually kind of surprised that these circuit breakers are also not in their security product, which is kind of cool. It's in the API management. I mean, it's API security, because you can also leverage circuit breakers in security reasons as well. They're pretty cool. They're pretty awesome to have. Now, what I wish is that every API just had these. You do an API through Azure API, they should just have circuit breakers. Again, in Azure API is load balancer management API. So you're getting an API to your Azure load balancer, which is going to allow you to dynamically facilitate your load balancing needs. It's maybe niche, but it's also pretty cool and awesome. Definitely something that's useful. That's all that I saw for the news this week. Eskandrol, Stiggy Man, Monta, thank you so much for joining and chatting. I still disagree that the AWS CLI is so descriptive. And maybe this is my specific purview. I tried to do a lot of Kubernetes stuff through it, and it was terrible. There's an EKS CTL that does Kubernetes specific things that I found much better for AWS. Maybe other AWS stuff is great through the AWS command line. As usual, if you guys find find things that are interesting to devs throughout the week, please feel free to bring them. Like we did with the Visual Studio code this week. Make sure that we don't miss them as a community. Bring those. We'll talk about them. If people get in a habit of bringing them and we have enough of them, we'll have just a section for, the community news of the week. And I think that would be fun. So again, please feel free to bring whatever news